This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don, and as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your question or comment into whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and they will appear here in my chat room, and we can talk directly. And I hope that you have had a wonderful week. Today is Friday, the first day of March. A new month, and it is a nice day here in Danville. Not not quite as nice as it was a couple of weeks ago, but way better than it was a few days ago. Um, so a lovely day. I expect to be out walking later, which will be quite enjoyable. Um, my subject for today is dreams and dream interpretation, and a lot of people a lot of people are fascinated with dreams, and some of them actually work with their dreams. And most people would probably be a little better off if they worked with their dreams. But it's not always the easiest thing to do because people have a tendency not to remember their dreams under normal circumstances. So if you don't remember your dreams, what do you do? How can you interact with your dreams if you don't remember them? And hello to Antonio in the chat room. It's good to see you, Antonio. Well, the answer to that is that you need to find ways to remember them. And there are two things I would recommend for that. The first one is that when you wake up, you write down whatever is in your head. It may be the dream of that, or if you can't remember what you may have been dreaming, just write down whatever is on the top of your head, because chances are it's left over from the dream. If you start to do this on a regular basis, you'll find that you're much more able to remember the things that you're dreaming, because you'll get in the habit of working to do so. Now, another thing, I find that if you wake up in the middle of the dream, you're far more likely to remember it. So another thing you can do to kind of prime that pump is set your alarm so that you wake up maybe a little earlier than usual, and maybe find yourself waking up from that dream and getting more details about it. These are a couple of things I would do, but generally the dream journal where you write down what you do remember is probably the best way. The other thing, of course, is to set your intent to remember your dreams. When you go to bed at night, stop and focus on remembering what you're going to dream, and this will help you to do so. Now, what is a dream, and why does it matter? Historically, dreams have often been viewed as spiritual communications, sometimes prophetic, sometimes more a matter of what needs to be dealt with in your life, and sometimes also, I think, some dreams don't necessarily have that level of significance. I think that you can tell when it's a more serious dream by how real it feels. Some dreams are communications from those who are in spirit, and those will tend to be very real in how they feel to you. They'll have a very solid sense about them. And I think more often than not, you're more inclined to remember those. Some may be working with your spirit guides. Some may be just unwinding from your day. Some dreams I don't think do make sense, and others are extremely insightful. And how do you know the difference? Well, you'll see whether they make sense or not. And how do you determine that? Well, you look at the symbols in the dream. And I think that some dreams are basically just our higher self entertaining itself while we sleep. But I do believe that many dreams are very significant. And I've had a few in my own lifetime that were very significant. Some were very much in need of interpretation, others were extremely clear. A lot of them I can remember being in my teenage years and having dreams about spiritual cleansing. And hello to Nikki in the chat room. And Nikki says this should be a very interesting chat. I certainly hope so. Um, and I do not remember those dreams needing a lot of interpretation because they were pretty clear in what they meant. But I do remember some very interesting parts of them. Um, but I also remember dreaming about people who I would meet later. I dreamed about my eventual wife, um, at least a decade before I met her, probably a little more than that. I think I was 12 or 13 years old at the time. And I dreamed about this, well, girl of the same age. And we were in the backyard of the home I grew up in. And we were talking and so forth. And our families were in the house celebrating. And it became clear in the dream they were celebrating a marriage. And what was interesting, when I eventually met this woman, I did not recognize her from the dream, although I remembered the dream. It was probably a few weeks into it when I realized, wait a minute, this person looks very familiar. Except in the dream, the woman was blonde, or the girl was blonde, and my late wife was not blonde. And I told her about this dream. I told her many of the details about the dream. And it turns out at that age, she had actually dyed her hair blonde. That was a pretty interesting little confirmation. And hello to Christine in the chat room. Hello to Michael in the chat room. It's good to see you. For many years, I dreamed about another person I would become very close to. And in this dream, there were three of us. And we were endlessly walking through these fantastic architectural areas and constantly talking about everything imaginable. And the third person just followed behind, totally silent, or mostly silent. And, I would wake up from these dreams and try to place who this person could be. Um, and I could never figure it out. And, many years later, I would meet them. And again, I would know them for a little while before I recognized it. But one day I realized, oh my goodness, this is that person I was dreaming about. Not only that, but that pretty much characterized the relationship. Constant talking about um, deep and interesting subjects. And there was, in fact, a third person um, who pretty much what was just there, as in the dream. So sometimes dreams will be prophetic in this way. They may introduce people who come into your life later. They may um, represent for you work that you're doing while you're sleeping, like the cleansing. For me, cleansing dreams usually involve water. And I believe that when those dreams happened, they were something that my higher self and my spirit guides were actually doing that came into my conscious mind through the dream. And as with clairvoyance, what you'll be able to remember, what you'll be able to understand from your dreams is what you can understand. So things will take symbolic forms in many occasions in order to have a meaning that will make sense to you. Because, of course, the things that happen in the spiritual world are energetic. But we don't always have a ready way to understand that with our conscious mind. And so you have symbolism. In dreams, I believe most everything is symbolic, at least when it's a meaningful spiritual dream. And even when it's just a dream that is a little bit more about entertainment, I think the things that are in it are still symbolic of what is closest, what is of greatest importance in your life at that time. So let us say you've had a dream and you want to know, what does it mean? Well, what you want to do, of course, first is go over that dream and ask yourself, what do the things in the dream mean to you? Now, you can go out and you can get by all kinds of books to tell you what things in dreams mean, but they don't necessarily tell you what they mean to you. There was a time, I believe, when most cultures had a pretty unified language of symbols. And in that period, a book on the meaning of symbols in dreams would have had a lot more relevance than it will have today. But our symbolism today is often very idiosyncratic and very individual. So you can use a book to guide you, but you want to remember that what something means in that book may not be what it means to you. Although I will have to tell you a dream that I had many years ago that included a symbol I did not recognize and would not have figured out on itself. This in this dream, my mother, who was then in spirit, came to visit me, and she was pregnant and about to give birth. And during the dream, she lost a tooth. And there were other things in the dream, but those are the relevant points. And I went to Lady Crystal for an interpretation of this dream for her to help me to see what these things would mean. Because losing I think it was a tooth didn't particularly have any meaning to me. But Crystal said no, that in a dream that is a symbol of death. She knew the symbol, I did not, but my spirit guides knew that I would go talk to her. Um, so if you're using a book of symbols, they may use um, those symbols to communicate with you, even if you don't already know them, on the premise that you will use that book. Um, in the case of this dream, it was my father who was about to die. And in fact, that happened shortly after the dream. And the pregnancy was the same thing. It represented his soon to be birth into the next world. Um, but I, and this was many years ago, would not have interpreted it that way without the help of Lady Crystal, who is familiar with those particular symbols. But generally speaking, you will know the symbols that come to you in a dream. And it's much more important what it means to you than what it means to any other person. Uh, and as I say, if you've studied conventional dream symbols, then they will have meaning for you, and they may come to you in that way. Lady Crystal loved to interpret her dreams. And one of the things she often used, she would often dream that she was in the house where she grew up under the hill, and the details of this house would tell her things about what the dream um, had to do with. And as I recall, the way that she understood this was that if the dream was on the ground floor, it had to do with things in your everyday life, things that you were aware of. If it was in the basement, it was subconscious matters, things that might be in your shadow, things that were influencing you, but you were not aware of them. And if it were in the attic, it was inspiration and spiritual guidance. I remember a particular dream that she told me about where my grandmother had visited her in the dream, and this was, we believed, a communication. My grandmother took her upstairs into the attic that did not actually exist in this house, and there she had boxes of hats that she had Crystal trying on. And this was probably in the mid-70s. It was before Crystal became Corellian First Priestess, but it was a bit of a symbol of where things were going. In these dreams, the house did not necessarily resemble itself. It often had features the original house did not have that had symbolic meaning. And Janet in the chat room, hello Janet, asks if there are any dream dictionaries or books that I would recommend. I can't really recommend any because I don't personally use them. My recommendation is to focus on what it means to you, but I have a very wide language of symbolism. But what I would say is look for one that speaks to you. Um, just don't take it too literally, and make sure that you're still listening to your own understanding of symbols. There are many of them, and the first one I ever saw came out of the 1800s, and it was related to Mademoiselle La Normande, if I remember correctly, who was a famous psychic reader of the early 1800s, supposedly read for Napoleon. Um, and hello to Mark in the chat room. Hello to Lady Kai in the chat room. And her book included dream interpretation, if I remember correctly. This was 40 years ago. Um, and obviously the symbols in it were early 19th century symbols. But it was still very fascinating to see how they interpreted them, But the cause and effect between the meaning of the symbols and how they were being interpreted was not always very obvious, at least to me at that age. What I would say, any book of dream dictionaries listing what different symbols mean can be useful in helping you to establish a language of symbols that you will use in your dreams. I don't know that one is necessarily better than another, because in the end, the language of symbols is subjective. What you're looking for is a way for spirit to communicate with you, and it does not require a form that will work for anyone else. It has to be what you will recognize. So choose a book you like, or make your own, and you will find spirit will use that language to communicate with you. And this is true in dreams, it's true in clairvoyance and psychic messages in general. And as I've often said, the wider your language of symbolism, the wider your reference in general, the more you can receive. If spirit wants to send you a message, whether through clairvoyance or through a dream, and you do not have a context for that message, the only way you can receive it is symbolically. I've told 1,000 times the story of Rosemary Fletcher and the daily newspaper. This was a reading that she did for Sir Edward years ago, 30 years ago at least, in which she predicted he would have a daily newspaper going out around the world. And she was 100% right and 100% wrong, because nobody saw the internet coming. No one we knew saw it coming as quickly as it did, or quite what it would mean. What she was describing was what would become the Daily Spell. It was a daily newspaper going out around the world electronically. She thought she was describing a brick and mortar newspaper, because that was the language that the world she knew. But the reading was 100% correct once you understood its meaning. So if you do not have the concept that spirit is trying to speak to you about, all you can do is get close to it. So the wider your range of concepts, the wider your range of symbols, the more open your mind, the better the messages you can get. And so I recommend, if you want to work with dreams, probably don't work with one dream dictionary or one book on dream interpretation. Read a lot of them. Get lots of ideas and build up your own language as much as you can. And then spirit will have lots of ways to get those messages to you. I was talking about dreams of cleansing earlier. All kinds of things, I believe, happen while we're sleeping at the spiritual level. Very often we are very active in our higher self when our conscious self is shut down for sleep. And sometimes we remember these things, and they can range from intense chakra work to intense healing to manifestation. And how do you interpret those in dream form? And very often, you're not going to have the language for exactly what happened on an energetic level, but you'll get symbols. One of my favorite examples of this came not from a dream, but from a clairvoyant experience. And that's the miracle of the jelly roll. So I'll tell you about the miracle of the jelly roll, but also how it's an example of symbolism. In the miracle of the jelly roll, which oh my goodness, I don't know how many decades ago that was. Could have been almost 40 years ago. Could have been more than that. But anyway, my grandmother, who is my primary spiritual guide, she came to myself and Lady Crystal in this vision, but she did not look like herself at all. She looked like Jane Wyman specifically. Jane Wyman at that time was playing in a nightly soap opera called Falcon Crest. She was playing the grandmother and matriarch in the in that nighttime soap opera, So she was a good symbol to tell us that, yes, it was my grandmother, the matriarch, who was speaking, and it was very clear to us it was my grandmother because she was wearing an outfit of my grandmother, but she didn't use her own face. Later, it was explained to us that was to give greater distance to the message. But she was riding her bicycle up and down the hills of San Francisco, um, and came to stop at a little sweet shop. And we all three went into the sweet shop, and Crystal and I went to the counter. And behind the counter was, at least at that time, a very stereotypical um, figure who was a large man in a t-shirt of the sort who might have the nickname Tiny. And you often saw this character as a short order cook in cartoons or TV. This was not that kind of shop, but that's still who was behind the counter. And we said in the vision, because we were not, the vision was being shown to us. And in the vision, we said, we would like a sweet. And the man said, well, what would you like? We said, well, we don't know. What would be best for us? And he said, well, I can't tell you that. You have to choose one. And this kind of went on with the explanation that we could have anything in the case in front of us, and it was full of anything you can imagine, but we had to choose it. He could tell us about it. He could recommend it or not recommend it, but we had to choose it. All of that came down to manifestation. Some of the symbols, my grandmother was the principal spirit guide that both Crystal and I worked with. The fact that she was not using her own face, as I said later, was to give greater distance to the message. And this happened in a number of visions over the years. The sweet shop represented the world of manifestation. At that point in time, we both quite loved sweet desserts, and they represented good things to us. And so they represented all the things you could manifest in all their different forms. But at that time, we were perhaps a little bit too passive, perhaps, in some of our choices. Spirit was trying to tell us to be more active, be more assertive in what we were manifesting for ourselves, and this was how they conveyed that message. And that's an example of what symbolism can take in a vision or a dream. And subsequently, we have used that basic format as a means of manifestation many times, but that's another program, but as a meditation to select the sweet that we want and move forward with that. But obviously, as I say, in spirit, everything is energetic. There are no sweet shops or sweets as such, but it was a good way to symbolize the process of manifesting. The idea of going up and down the hills of San Francisco, at that time, San Francisco represented to us a very sophisticated metropolis, and the kind of place that we considered a place where people would live out their highest potentials. And this would have been, I don't know how many years ago. But, that's the kind of thing you might see. Now, Christine says in the chat room, just the last couple of years did I become confident enough to read tarot, interpret dreams, etc. That's wonderful. It's taken years of observing and learning for me. I now realize how personal magic is for me and how capable I am. My path has been slow and steady. I love hearing of your personal experiences and how they aid you in your magic and life endeavors. Thank you, Christine. And this is a very, I think it's everyone's journey. It takes a while to learn how to do this. And a big part of that time is learning to be confident in it. Most people who study spirituality, who study magic and psychic reading and dream interpretation and everything else, are good at it long before they're confident in it. Most people tend to second guess themselves. And the hardest part, I think, of this work is learning to move past that. And as Christine says, um, magic is a very personal path. And how you experience it isn't necessarily going to be quite like anybody else. And yet at the same time, it may be very much like them. And Nikki says, sometimes loved ones, humans and pets who have passed to the other side, come to me in dreams. Sometimes I dream things that happen later and are sometimes very unpleasant. Am I a medium? The easy answer to that question is I would say probably yes. Um, Spirits do come to us in dreams. And how can you tell if you're having an actual spiritual communication from someone who's in spirit? In my experience, those will be very realistic feeling dreams. They will not feel like other dreams for the most part. They have a very immediate feeling about them. And some wonderful things can happen in those dreams. And I mentioned my earlier dream about my mother. After she had crossed over, I had many dreams about her that I believe were communications from her. For whatever reason, in that dream, she couldn't just say, your father's about to die. She had to use this very symbolic way to get through to me, or at least it came into my mind in a symbolic way. The communication may actually have been far more direct, and my mind simply couldn't handle it. Because, of course, it becomes symbolism coming through your mind. Um, and sometimes we do dream things that happen later. Um, and Nikki says some of those dreams for her can be very unpleasant. Um, Probably because those are the most important things you need to be warned of. And are you a medium? In a manner of speaking, yes. Now, to become a fully developed medium, there's more to it, of course. But yes, that's basically, in my opinion, what we're talking about. You're receiving spiritual communications. Um, so I would say that is a very good start. And usually when we use the term medium, we're talking about doing it while we're conscious, um, or conscious but in a trance rather than dreaming. But it is the same thing. And I want to say, I see we're near the end of our hour, but I do want to take a moment and talk a little bit more about symbolism. When you receive a psychic communication, whether in clairvoyance or through a dream, it will come through your crown chakra and down through your mind. Spirit has no language except energetics. Spirit will communicate with you telepathically. It will communicate concepts to you. In order for you to understand that, you have to translate it through your mind into language that your mind can understand. That's where it takes on the symbolism. This is why, if you're going to do this kind of work, you are well advised to have a very broad range of symbolism and to keep um, your knowledge of the world at a high point, because spirit can communicate far more effectively when you have those concepts in your mind. And one of the things I've often talked about um, in certain kinds of spiritualism, for example, they don't really think of it that way. But that raises questions like, well, this was a German spirit. Why would it be speaking English? Or the spirit will come through with some sort of accent, often not a very good one. And this may cause people to think, well, this isn't a real experience, but it's actually how it's coming through your mind. The person believes that the spirit must have an accent. One will be provided, but it really doesn't, because the spirit isn't speaking to you. It's thinking to you. It's telepathing to you. And how that comes out takes its form from how you interpret it. So, when I do channeling or mediumship or oracular work or whatever you want to call it, there are no accents. But I've seen other people who have usually the hokiest accents imaginable when they bring messages through. But I don't believe that means it's not an accurate or authentic message. I just think they're imposing an accent on it. And there's a wonderful old episode of Bewitched in which they do a seance for Darren's mother. And her spirit manifests in the room through Samantha's magic. And she's speaking to her daughter, um, um, Darren's mother. It's Darren's grandmother. And, well, no, I believe it's his great-grandmother. It's his mother's grandmother. And about halfway through this, his grandmother says, or his mother says, well, grandmother, this is wonderful, but what happened to your Irish brogue? And suddenly the spirit starts speaking with an Irish brogue. That's kind of an example of what I'm talking about. It will take it will manifest what you impose on it. But if you allow it to come through, it will come through in a very plain, a very ordinary way, a very non-oogie boogie sort of way. So with that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour. I thank you for joining me. I'll be back on Monday. And let us close with our prayer, as we always do. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to be open to the messages of Spirit, however they may come to us, whether as intuitions and hunches, whether as messages through clairvoyance or divination, or whether as dreams and visions. Beloved Spirit, beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, with great love and respect, we thank you, and knowing you are always with us, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. I thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And